Howdy guys, and welcome back. Okay, today in this video we're looking at the Middle Colonies. We're going to cover some kind of generic information about the creation and the origins and the history of the Middle Colonies. Now, what do I mean when I say Middle Colonies? When U.S. history refers to the Middle Colonies, they're referring to New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and sometimes they'll include Maryland, but generally they'll say the Chesapeake region. Maryland gets put in there with Virginia and the South. So we're going to talk about New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and we'll just recap Maryland very briefly. So New York was originally founded by the Dutch West India Trading Company. Now, if you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean and the British East India Trading Company, you have the East Indies and the West Indies. East Indies would be actual India. The West Indies would be the Caribbean, because Columbus, again, called it the West Indies because that's where he thought he arrived back in 1492. Now, the Dutch are not the only ones that arrive in this region. The Dutch arrive in New York and parts of New Jersey. The Swedish also make their way to Delaware, New Jersey, and start settling in the region. And the reason why they come to the Middle Colonies is they're looking for a lucrative trading with the Lenape Indians, trading fur, specifically beaver fur. Now, the Dutch are going to purchase, and put that in air quotes right there, purchase the island of Manhattan from the natives, right, with a box full of goods, beads, glass, feathers, guns, things like this. It's important to note that the natives in New York did not have a sense of personal property, right? For them, the idea of these colonists buying Manhattan Island would be like someone buying the sky. It just didn't fit within their concept of property and their views on society. Now, the Dutch will create a settlement known as New Amsterdam, right? It has a fort, it has trading posts, it's on Manhattan Island, it's on the mouth of the Hudson River, quite profitable for the Dutch and their trading. Now, much like the British, they're going to give land out to different nobles and lords that come over to the New World to set up plantations, trading posts, cities. This is the Dutch patroonship system. It's how they distribute land in the New World to the Dutch nobles that are coming over. Now, looking at the economy, New York has quite a large lumber industry with the forests that were there. They also have the natural harbors of New York, and so shipbuilding is incredibly important, right? We talked about the South. The main industry of the South was agriculture. The Middle Colonies is going to be lumber, mineral resources, and as we get towards the Plymouth Bay colonies, the New England colonies, will have shipbuilding because the soil is of lesser quality and you can produce boats, ships in those natural harbors. Now, the Dutch do import some slaves to New York, however, it does not match nearly the size, scale, quantity of that of the Spanish and Portuguese, and does not come close to what the British were bringing in to Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. Now, the Dutch set up their Dutch Reformed Church, right? It's a branch of Protestantism. So this is important for the sole purpose of when the English show up. Okay, I'm going to always mess up on this name. Peter Sylvans. He is in charge of New York, right, in the Dutch-Anglo War. He is going to surrender New Amsterdam to the English. Now, the English are going to take New Amsterdam and they're going to rename it, rebrand it as New York off of the English English city, right? And so again, it's founded by Dutch settlers and the Dutch West India Trading Company, and the purpose is, of course, for that fur trade with the natives. And of course, the soil is not necessarily most superb, so while there's some farming, it's mostly going to be based off the lumber and the mines, building ships along the coast, and it is going to be taken over by the British in the Anglo-Dutch Wars. Now, New Jersey. New Jersey has a little bit unique history. It had both the Dutch in the north, right up on Manhattan Island, and it had the Swedish who made landfall in that little region between Delaware and New Jersey. Now, they're going to call it, of course, New Svinja, with the Dutch taking over from the Swedish. It's eventually also going to fall into the hands of the British during that Anglo-Dutch War, and Britain will even make an agreement so Sweden can't try to come back and claim it from the English once they have it. Again, not so much the shipbuilding that we saw in New York. The soil is a little bit better, but it's the Swedish trying to set up a colony in the south, and the Dutch, of course, expanding their colonies in the north. Now, Lord Delaware, we've talked about this guy in the last 2 videos, okay? He was a noble from England who fought the Scots and the Irish, drove them out with scorched earth tactics, was brought to the New World, okay, to Virginia to fight against the Powhatan Confederacy. Very successful in the war against the Powhatan Confederacy, and after the First War, he is awarded a territory now known as Delaware, which we seized from, well, I say we, that the Anglos seized from the Swedish and the Dutch. Okay, there's, again, decent farming, decent shipbuilding, again, relying on the ocean, but it is going to be quite a new and small colony for Lord Delaware. Now, Pennsylvania, during Cromwell and the English Restoration, right, the Quakers, who are a nonviolent group, they are going to be a smaller offshoot of the Puritan movement, right? Somewhere between the Anglican Church and Puritans, you had the Quaker movement, and they are going to make a deal with Charles II during the Restoration era, okay? Again, saying, hey, we have several beliefs with the Puritans, although we are non-violent, so we are not out there persecuting Protestants, Anglicans, or Catholics. And so they make a negotiation, a deal with Charles II to get a territory for themselves, right? William Penn famously goes and makes this negotiation with the king. So when the Quakers show up to modern-day Pennsylvania, unlike the English who are fighting to drive them out, the Quakers, non-violent, are going to start trade and not quite alliance systems, but they're not going to be aggressive trying to drive the natives off the land. And so the natives, in turn, are not going to fight back very much or be violent towards the Quakers, because the Quakers are not coming in with the intent of colonizing, taking over, and driving the natives off the land. Now, Pennsylvania has much better soil compared to New York, quite a large farming area, especially in the south. You have forest, in the north the Appalachian Mountains, in the west there's resources that can be mined out, and so you can see that they are going to set up a major settlement along the Delaware River known as Philadelphia, right? The city of brotherly love, as it's once famously called, as it's famously named. So Philadelphia, of course, built along the Delaware River. There's offshoots which go up north that the Quakers are going to start settling along the offshoot of this river. And most people today, at least in my classes, when they hear the term Quaker, the first thing they think of is Quaker oats, right? And again, tie back to the farming, that they are not trying to drive off the land. They're not trying to drive the natives off the land. They're trying to farm and create a life for themselves so they can practice their religion freely. Now, several Germans will also be leaving the Holy Roman Empire, leaving Germany and Spanish Netherlands and going to the New World, the Anabaptists. We're going to see Mennonites leaving Europe and settling in Pennsylvania. We'll see the creation of the Amish movement in Pennsylvania. And when North Carolina and South Carolina are split, we'll see tons of Scots and Irish leaving North Carolina to go settle in Pennsylvania, right? And remember when in the past video, we talked about how North Carolina fought off the Tuscarora natives, drove them all the way to New York, where they joined the Iroquois, right? Lots of the Scots and Irish are going to go and settle in Pennsylvania as well. And so, just the brief summary, right? It was the haven for the Quakers. It's an agricultural society, very peaceful, especially early on with the natives, right? Talking about religious tolerance, the Quakers, the Mennonites, the Amish. These groups are not focused on slavery. They are focused on doing the work themselves. Again, it's part of that restoration where Charles II is reassuming the throne. He wants to kind of heal some of the tensions and divides in English society. And so we have Englishmen coming over, the Quakers. Later we get the Germans, the Scots, the Irish, all coming over and settling in Pennsylvania. Now, Maryland is arguably a border state when it comes to whether it's the South or whether it's the Middle Colonies. If you didn't watch the last video, Lord Baltimore from the Calvert family, he set Maryland up as a Catholic haven. Again, during the time of Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans, Maryland is founded to set aside a space for Catholics to practice their religion freely and not have to deal with the persecution and genocide and targeting that is going on in England. Again, colonists coming to the New World, we've told our students for many years it's for religious freedom, for their religious freedom, to practice their religion, not necessarily for everyone to practice their own individual religion. And we see this, right, with the Puritans who settled in Massachusetts, with the Catholics in Maryland, the Quakers kind of being the exception to the rule. Again, we talked about this in the past video. The Maryland Toleration Act, henceforth blasphemy of God shall deny our Savior Jesus Christ, deny the Holy Trinity, shall be punished with death or confiscation and forfeiture of all his lands. Again, protecting the religious freedom of Catholics in Maryland. Now, Maryland is going to have a decent amount of slavery early on. The people settling in Maryland are going to settle for religious freedom, but they're going to grow wheat, food for survival, or they're going to grow tobacco for profit, and most of the slavery in Maryland is going to be settled around tobacco plantations, right? Again, that's the economic gain. It is much more laborious and tedious work than harvesting wheat for bread. Now again, there's just a few middle colonies in the region, and this is just a brief overview of them. There are some major themes that we see, especially in the middle colonies. The first off is dealing with the Iroquois Confederacy. We have the creation of Pennsylvania, the settlement of Delaware, New Jersey, and New York, and that is pushing right up against the Iroquois Confederacy, who are going to be the native powerhouse in the region, right? New York is a stronghold. It's strategically located to guard the east and the west. We saw that the Lenape start off very friendly towards the English coming in, especially in places like when the Dutch settle in New York, New Amsterdam, right? They're just there for the fur trade. Very friendly to the Quakers, who are there just settling along the Delaware River, not expanding very much further off of the little side tributaries. We have the English Restoration. We talked about this briefly on the last video. We had James I, the namesake of Jamestown. We had Charles. We had Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans who revolted and put themselves on the throne. Democracy, dictatorship, republic, whatever you want to call it, was not a great time for anyone who was not a Puritan. And then we have Charles II reclaiming the throne in the Restoration after Cromwell's death, and we start to see some of those things heal. We saw Carolina being divided between North and the South. We saw the English and the Dutch go to war with each other. Again, this was to claim the colonies in New York and Delaware, right? The Dutch had claimed these for themselves and claimed it from the Swedish, and then the English are going to take them from the Dutch and rename them after places in England, right? New York, New Jersey, both of these are English locations, English areas, taking the name, changing it. We also saw the immigration of Germans, right? The Anabaptists coming over, especially in Pennsylvania, and we'll see the push for the Scots and the Irish continually coming to the New World, settling in North Carolina, settling in Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia. Again, we're going to see diversity starting to increase in this time frame. The Middle Colonies, again, because agriculture, yes, is somewhat important, right? You still have a decent amount of land for them to grow crops on, but you're also going to see starting to shift towards a naval economy, building ships, fishing, mining resources, being able to do a little bit of everything because they have a little bit of everything, right? There's not those mineral deposits in the South, and there's not the farmable land up in New England. Because of that, we see the population in the major cities boom, right? Boston, New York, Philadelphia, all of these are going to spike. Charleston, the agriculture in the South, going to not grow nearly as much. Again, South Carolina was the affluent part of the Carolina Territory, very metropolitan, very much based off of the English aristocracy. And the people settling are settling for bread, right? They're trying to make a living for themselves. Most people settling in the Middle Colonies are not there to exploit the ground with tobacco or exploit slave labor. They're trying to plant food and grow food and crops for themselves. We saw that was quite different in the South, where the focus is on tobacco, tobacco, tobacco to make money, money, money. And the last big theme, right, religious tolerance. We talked about it with the Quakers being a restoration colony, trying to smooth some of the wrinkles and bad blood between the Anglican and the Puritan. We saw the Maryland law of religion. Again, just focusing off the last video in this, we can see different regions are going to have different societies based off their environment, whether it's agriculture, mining and shipping with agriculture, or just wood building, shipbuilding. They're all based off of their environment. This video is much shorter. I appreciate all of y'all that made it to the end. Until next time.